Morning, everyone. It's Tom at hospital, Bud in Georgia, and John Johnson up in Ione, Washington, who's here this morning because I think we told you that we were going to start a new series on the life and character of David. And John has been looking at David in depth for weeks, I think probably, John. And so we asked him to come and just set this up for us, help us understand and get a broad view about David, and so that we can go forward with a number of lessons. So John, it's all yours, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Bud. So good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. I wish I could see your faces, but at any rate, one nice thing about the technology is at least you can see me while I share a little bit with you. Maybe just a little bit of a context to the context this morning. I am up here in Northeast Washington. Some of you know Heather and I have a cabin up here. We escape. It's become more and more of an escape for me. I've moved from teaching most of my time to spending most of my time writing. And so the cabin affords me an opportunity to do that. And as Bud noted, I have been giving a lot of thought to David because I've been writing this third book on leadership and thinking about leadership from how God sees it. And so looking at the characters in particular in scripture. So Bud had asked me to give a little bit of an overview of David, and I thought what I would do here is to give you 4 reasons that come to mind why this is really worth our time and investment of reflecting and thinking. So the obvious first reason is because as you look at scripture and study it, there's no one who dominates scripture like David. Outside of Christ, especially when we're looking at a human figure, there's no one in scripture that has more a recorded part of life than David. He dominates. We're told more about David, when you think about it, than any other person in scripture. Now, that in itself should say, God must want me to know something about this man because God invests so much of scripture in 1st, 2nd Samuel, and Kings and Chronicles. David dominates the landscape. He is, as I think Peterson puts it, the most detailed rendering of God-dimensioned humanity we have. Which is a huge statement. So that in itself says, somewhere in my life, I need to really try to understand this man and try to understand what God is telling us. The second reason is that when you look at David, no one has lived a life of such utter contrasts. I think really early on in my youth, when I came to Christ and I began to read scripture, I must say I came to David with sort of this idealistic notion of this psalmist who lives this godly, amazing life. And I will say over the years, and I've read through David's life over many years, I find myself both in awe and in disgust. And they both are accentuated the more I look at him. He is, as Peterson puts it, the essence of earthy spirituality. He's a very fleshly, earthy man, but he's also something that walks in the heavenlies with God. He is the essence of spirituality in many ways. He's a man, when you think about, who lived on the highest spiritual peaks. When you read some of his Psalms, you ask yourself, could I ever hope to get as high as David has climbed? He has breathed this rarefied air of authentic spiritual communion. And when you read Psalms like Psalm 18, you see this. But at other times, David just goes into the gutter. He goes into the depths. He's an adulterer. He's a murderer. He dies resentful and bitter. With each reading of his story, I find myself with David, my emotions all over the place. I find myself both in awe and disgust. So why study David? Well, because when you think about it, and I'm sure you do, as I do, we're earthy spirituality as well. We find ourselves on peaks, and we find ourselves in valleys. Sometimes we're amazed at God's grace. Sometimes we are disgusted with our behaviors, our choices. Now, David takes these to the extremes. Last I checked at Village, I don't know if there are any murderers or adulterers, at least the combination of those. But nonetheless, we have our own flaws and our own failures. And we at times step back and we go, wow, look what God's done through my life. I'm just amazed. By his grace, there are mornings we wake up with our heart attuned to God. This morning, I got in my kayak as I try to do each morning, and I go upriver, and I found this little lagoon, and I just go in there where it's absolutely beautiful and quiet, and I spend time with God. But the only reason I do that is because the grace of God compels me to do that. So I am this like you, I am this mix. And so in this sense, I find that I resonate a lot with David. David is this man of humble birth, and yet he's a king of the most extensive empire in the ancient Near East. He is courageous, and yet he's conniving. He's loyal, and he's self-serving. He's a hero. He's a fugitive. He's faithful. He's an adulterer. He's sensitive, and he's brutal. He's forgiving, and he's vengeful. He's a musician, and he's a warrior. He is, I suppose you'd have to say, that the ultimate Renaissance man. His life embraced the full range of humanness. Someone once said he's a combination of Napoleon Bonaparte, George Washington, Beethoven, Martin Lloyd-Jones, Michael W. Smith, and Robert Browning. He's just this interesting mix. So why study David? Because he's a mirror to ourselves, and of this incredible mix and complexity that describes all of us. Thirdly, and I suppose I can't help but focus on this because I've been writing on leadership and theology of leadership about 8 hours a day for a year, and so I'm driven to look at leadership in David, and few demonstrate leadership like David. David is prime material. David fleshes out leadership's definition. I've read many definitions, but I think a biblical definition of leadership is the very best, and that is a leader is someone who is summoned by God to serve the purposes of God in one's generation. And when you think about it, that's exactly what Paul sums up in Acts 13:36, as Paul is speaking and giving a case for Christ. He rehearses the story, the narrative of the Old Testament. And when he comes to David, he says these words, perhaps you know them, quote, "For when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep." It's just a simple, concise statement. This is what leaders do. Good leaders, they serve God's purpose. David also illustrates why leaders are necessary. David brought direction. He brought order. He brought justice. David demonstrated the very best essential core values that leaders must have: justice, love, courage, humility, integrity, diligence. These are the character qualities that, to me, inspire me to follow a leader. And David lived out all of those. He was completely competent as a leader, shrewd, collaborative, an inspiration. He was decisive. He stewarded resources. He was visionary, strategic, tactical. And he reverenced the role of a king. So David is a phenomenal leader, yet understanding all of this, he, like every leader, was deeply flawed. He was driven at times by his lusts. He had many wives. He seemed to have a lust for sex, a lust for power, and he was a deeply flawed parent. I wouldn't go to David as someone to say, here's how to parent. I did a series, some of you, well, I hope you may remember, I did a series at Village years ago on flawed families in the Bible. And in that series, we talked about Amnon, David's firstborn, and Tamar, his half-sister, whom he raped, which then led eventually to Amnon's death by Absalom, another son of David, who ended up, because David was such a failure at parenting Absalom, Absalom almost destroyed his kingdom. So we're back to flaws and yet great things. He was a great leader, but a tremendously flawed leader. Here's a final reason why I think it really is valuable to study this life. You will understand a number of things more deeply. If you really look deeply into David's life, you will know God better than you know him. You will see why friendships are essential. You will realize why God sometimes takes you into the wilderness. You will see what it means to grieve. You will learn how to deal with difficult people. You will see what's required to overcome temptation. You will see what it means to suffer. And you will see how not to transition and how to transition in life. So, Bud, I think this is what you asked. I hope. Anything you would want me to say further?
No, John, you have given us a great amount here, and you've made me even more excited now to get into this because of the complexity of this man, and to some degree frightening of what I will find about myself that will become more illuminated in my life. And in teaching this class, all of us in the class are, we're in the last sixth of our life, third, many of us. And it's so easy to sit back and say, well, you really can't teach an old dog new.
Yeah, but I don't, you froze up there for a moment. So while you can maybe perhaps still hear me, if you look behind Bud, that is a picture of, well, it was a picture anyway, of our view from the window of where we live. So it gives you a little bit of a taste of our our place. So thank you so much for letting me come and share with you. And Samir, I think I'll hand off to you, okay?
Thank you, John. Thank you. I'll come back in.
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, John. We heard you very, very well, and everybody, thank you here.
Okay. All right.
All the best and God bless.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.